Hello, amazing NARAL members. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. What a special night. I cannot wait to tell you more about the guests we have tonight. I know you could be so many different places right now, but you are here. I hope you have your drink of choice. I hope you have food or snacks pulled up because you're in for a treat. I want you to treat yourself in other ways too. So I will, in just a moment, you're in this really cool platform. I'm going to tell you a bit about it in just a moment. And I am going to give you all a chance. If you don't already see it, I will be telling you a bit more about a chat box that you will have access to. And I will be encouraging you to introduce yourselves to other attendees, amazing NARAL members from all across the country in that chat box. Again, I'm just so happy to have you here. We have really important couple months ahead of us. I really believe that we will power ourselves to reproductive freedom victories at the state, local, and federal level, electing reproductive freedom champions. And we need to make sure we okay. Okay, got it. So thank you so much. I hope you are all doing well today. Um, so we're going to be getting started shortly. Thank you all. Sorry, I had a little bit of an echo. I hope I didn't scare you away. But I promise you, we are now just going to talk a bit about this system, Hopin, that you are in right now. So I'm actually going to ask that we put on the screen a little graphic right now to actually show you what this amazing platform is. So when you all joined this event, you were in a reception area. That is a great place you can go to just to see like what is the agenda for this event. There are a lot of different things, a lot of different places on this platform we'll be asking you to go to. So that is something that you can always return to see where to go to next. We will also be guiding you through at all times. Right now, you are in something called the main stage, the room where it happens. This is where the main event of tonight is. And this is, you can see there is a stage button on on the graphic. That's where you are right now. So you are going to get to hear from NARAL President Elise Hogue and Rewire's very own Imani Candy. In just a minute, I will introduce them, but you are right now in the stage. Right after this amazing conversation that I am looking forward to, we are going to invite you to choose your own adventure. You didn't think you were going to do that tonight, did you? Well, you get to choose your own adventure. And we're going to, together, after this conversation, explore the sessions part of Hopin. What is the sessions portion of this event? Well, you will be able to choose whether to go to one session about hosting a book party about the lie that binds. If you loved hearing about the book, you've already ordered it, and you can't wait to tell your friends about it, well, you can go to this session to learn how to host your very own book party. If you want a preview of a special event that we will be announcing on this call happening in less than a month, then you will go to that session. I will be the moderator for that session. I cannot wait to tell you more about that event, but I'm not going to steal Elise's thunder. She's going to announce it and just later on this call. After sessions, again, we were going to spend some time here in the main stage. Then you're going to choose what session to go to. And then after that, there's another part of Hopin. You can go to the networking section. That's where you can be put in place with, you can be put in touch with a fellow attendee and get to know a little bit about what they learned from this amazing event tonight and what they are committed to do. And you can share what you are committed to do for the movement for reproductive freedom moving on into the fall. Or you can visit the expo booth. That's where you can learn more about the book and find the link to purchase the book. And that's where you can register for the special event we're going to get into details with shortly. A few very quick notes. If you are on an internet browser, obviously you all are on an internet browser. We highly encourage you that you are using Chrome or Firefox. Chrome internet browser or Firefox. Those work best with this platform. If you're on a phone, that's okay. We're mobile friendly. Just a fair warning, do not use Edge, Internet Explorer, or Brave. Safari is not fully compatible, but again, if you're on an iPhone, we're mobile friendly. Lastly, chat box. I'm going to ask you all to take an action right now on the chat box. I want you to introduce yourself, your name, where in the country you are joining us from, and I want to hear about the last book that you read. I know what the next book you're going to read is. It's going to be The Lie That Binds, but I want to hear about the last book you read really quick. So again, share your name, where you are in the country, and the last book you read. We are so excited to have you. We are going to launch a poll in just a minute. I'm going to test it right now. But also know there is a people tab. If you see a friend in the attendees list and you want to message them, you can hover over to people. We're going to try out a poll right now. I'm going to ask that the poll be launched right now. And I want to know, after this event, after you're fired up, the work's not done. We want you to continue working with NARAL to mobilize the majority of Americans who support reproductive freedom to elect reproductive freedom champions. So we will have a lot to celebrate this fall. So you see the poll right now. I want you to answer. Are you committed to write postcards to reproductive freedom voters across the country? Are you going to join us to make many calls with our pro-choice call system? Or are you going to sign up to text voters all across the country? Or my gold star volunteers, are you going to do all of the above? That would be amazing. So that poll is running right now. Please answer it. For those of you who are on the Hotbin system, I know we're also streaming Facebook Live. So for anyone on Facebook, it's all good. I'll tell you the results of the poll later. Okay, so let me please move on to introductions right now. So I really have the pleasure of introducing two phenomenal individuals who have done so much for our movement and so much for the progressive movement overall. Let me start by introducing Imani Candy. Imani is senior editor for law and policy at Rewire News. If my sources are correct, that is a new fancy title. Congratulations, Imani. And first of all, before I tell you a little bit more about Imani, for those of you who do not know Rewire News, you need to have this be your daily page to visit. It is an award-winning nonprofit daily online publication purely devoted to evidence-based reporting on reproductive and sexual health, rights, and justice. And it doesn't stop there. Rewire also looks at the intersections of racial, environmental, immigration, and economic justice. Now, Imani, I don't know how Imani finds the time in the day, but Imani covers law and courts, of course, for Rewire and many other things, and began and continues to write for the Angry Black Lady Chronicles. If you like that name, Imani's Twitter handle is Angry Black Lady. For years, I thought I was following her, but it just turns out I wasn't. Just everyone in my life was retweeting Imani. So now I'm actually following her. You should as well. Imani's a recovering attorney turned award-winning journalist and political blogger. So Imani, thank you so much for being here. And I also want to this is a popular podcast. I'm sure a lot of you are on it already, but you all should take a moment right now to subscribe to Imani's podcast, Boom, Lawyered. It is a podcast that it is the go-to place for getting the latest updates on the reproductive freedom movement and what is happening, especially when it comes to the policy and legal arena. What I love about it, Imani really breaks it down in a very accessible way. I know we don't normally think lawyer is inaccessible, but I promise you, you're going to want to listen to this podcast. And we're going to share a link to that podcast right now if you want to subscribe in the chat box for those of you who are in Hop In. I would next like to introduce President of NARAL Pro-Choice America, Elise Hogue. Elise has led NARAL in the fight for reproductive freedom since 2013. And under her leadership, NARAL has become a true organizing powerhouse. I've been able to see it, I can verify, tripling its membership to over 2.5 million, advancing state and federal legislation to protect and also expand abortion access, and fighting an unprecedented wave of abortion bans at the state level. Before I turn it over to Elise and Amani, just a small personal note. I've been at NARAL for a decade. I know NARAL before Elise, and I know NARAL since Elise took the helm. And I'm so proud of what Elise has built. And I would not have dedicated an entire decade of my life to NARAL without Elise's leadership. So thank you, Elise. And with that, Elise and Amani, please take it away.
Thank you, Travis. That was a little bit of a surprise introduction, but I think the world of Travis. I always say about organizing at NARAL, we are as powerful as our members choose to invest in us. So thank you for being here tonight, all of NARAL members. I think you are in for a real treat. Let me just give a little bit of background about why we wrote this book. And I intentionally say we, even though I did a lot of the actual putting words together, because this was a massive collaborative effort. And part of what happened is that we sort of started to look at how we had this conundrum, because we had, on one hand, a country where the vast majority of individuals identified as believing in legal access to abortion, and on the other hand, a policy and political landscape that was watching, that we were watching and participating in, like just shrinking these rights and freedoms and justice on a daily basis. And that was a puzzle that needed to be solved. And part of what we started to do was dig really deeply into both who this opposition is, what they're doing, and what they stand for, and other people and organizations that had already banked an enormous amount of expertise about what we were up against, what they really stand for, and the most effective and strategic ways to fight against them. We started to compile this research. In fact, one of the things that we started to see, and this gets into why we wrote the book, one of the things we started to see in the lead up to 2016 is that anti-choice platforms online have a disproportionate amount of audience share, and they are really ignored by mainstream political people, mainstream political reporters, because we have this misconception that the anti-choice movement, they would call themselves the pro-life movement, is sort of misguided perhaps, but benign. And what we were seeing, in fact, was you had a lot of medical disinformation about abortion, a lot of threatening language, intimidation, and bullying around people who would access abortion and really embrace reproductive freedom. But you also had just a lot of traditional hate speech, a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, and a lot of racism and straight up misogyny traveling across these platforms. And similarly, at the same time, we were getting asked all these questions about how could this pro-life moral majority movement align behind a thrice married serial predator who's a reality talk show host. And for us, these questions converged into the crystallization of an understanding that a lot of our members and a lot of our audience didn't understand how deeply steeped the radical right anti-choice movement was in misogyny and racism, and an architected strategy over decades to weaponize abortion and reproductive oppression as a way to maintain privilege and power for a very small number of predominantly white, predominantly men, predominantly self-identified fundamentalist Christians. And so it felt important to us to aggregate this into a narrative that advanced our collective analysis and helped us be more strategic moving forward. We believe knowledge is power. We believe that understanding what we're up against and how they use abortion to actually move control. It's basically about control, means that we're going to be more effective in the ways we fight them, more effective in the coalitions we build, more effective in the voices we lift up, and more effective in the values that we seek to advance. One of the people that, so we wrote, sorry, I should say, so we wrote a book called The Lie That Binds. You can get it at theliethatbinds.com. There will be also a please do pre-order. Again, we think knowledge is power. We think our collective analysis allows us to fight more strategically together. The book is an act of resistance, which means we have to get it out there. We have to get it into more people's hands in order to definitively change the narrative moving forward. One of the mistakes we made in 2016 was underestimating that power of the anti-choice movement to put someone like Donald Trump in power. We cannot afford that again. We've got to change the narrative. One of the places we sought to build a foundation from was Rewire News. Since I've come into NARAL Pro-Choice America, Rewire, which was formerly RH Reality Check, was my go-to to sort of understand what I was in for and to better arm and equip myself as a leader of an organizing organization to tell the truth, basically, and to organize around really factual narratives that help us be strategic. Once I was on RH Reality Check, now Rewire, I had also found this amazing voice on Twitter who goes by Angry Black Lady. I got to know Imani Gandhi through both these platforms. Her immense Twitter platform, her incredible incisive analysis of all things reproductive freedom and justice through Rewire News, and now, of course, through her incredible podcast, Boom Lawyered. So it is a thrill for me to be able to bring this incredible voice to our members at NARAL Pro-Choice America. Imani, thank you so much for being here tonight. Say hi to our members.
Hi, members, and thank you for having me, Elise. It's a pleasure to be here.
So how have you, we always open these sort of member gatherings because it's tough times, right? Like people are dealing with a lot. And I know you write a lot on Twitter about the challenges, but also your investment in taking care of yourself so that we can better be the activists we want to be in the world. So share with our members what you're doing to take care of yourself in this moment.
Oh gosh, what am I doing? I'm cooking a lot more than I used to. I play a lot of video games, so I'm shooting a lot of things, just random things. I like to. I've started boxing, actually, fitness boxing,
Nice.
which is kind of
That's
fun
awesome.
and a good way to release a lot of aggression. So it's just like a video thing, so I'm not hitting anyone or anything. But I'm definitely considering actually putting up a punching bag in my living room so I can really maybe even start kickboxing. Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, I do a lot of, I watch a lot of Netflix, just a lot of sort of just downtime, just kind of chilling out, because the work that we do, the work that I do, the work that you do, the work that NARAL does, it's hard work and it's stressful. And it can be really depressing, especially in the era of Trump. So it's definitely important to take care of yourself, and whatever that means for you, you really should lean into it. So I've been doing that, leaning into that.
I get super inspired by your accounting, not only of you're taking care of yourself, but you're allowing yourself to vent when you get frustrated. I find it incredibly comforting. So you are one of my actually go-to voices on law and policy. And one of the things that we really dive into in The Lie That Binds is that the radical right really set out, as they were seeking control, as they were using reproductive oppression as a way to maintain control, to take over our courts, right? There was a systemic takeover of the judiciary in a way that has been really chilling. And I know that this is something you've thought a lot about. How did we get here? And what exactly did they seek to do? And how far along that path are they?
Well, I mean, we got here because the right are very organized, extremely organized, and they're also extremely unified around one message. And that message is, we don't like abortion, we don't like lesbians, we don't like gay people, we don't like bisexual people, we don't like trans people, we love religion, and we want to be able to use religion in a way that imposes our values onto everyone, even irrespective of whether you hold those values. So that's really how we got here, is just incredible organization by these anti-choice forces. And, I have to hand it to them because they've been agitating on this issue for, 40 years now, 45 years now. And they really are so close to getting exactly what they want. We're at that tipping point. We've got one guy on the Supreme Court, John Roberts, who doesn't like abortion. And he happened to rule in our favor in the most recent case, June Medical Services, but on a technicality. So we really are, our backs are up against the wall. And in order to move forward, not only do we have to reimagine how we're going to proceed, and as a journalist, I have to reimagine how I'm going to proceed in this space. As organizers, NARAL members, people who work at abortion funds and other advocacy groups have to reimagine how it is that they're going to approach this fight. And I think that reimagining has been happening gradually over the last 20 years, particularly over the last 10 years, but it's been slow going. And so because we are sort of a bigger tent and we're concerned about a lot of groups of people, and they, fundamentalist Christians, evangelical Christians, have one goal, and they're all really rallied around that goal, it makes it easier for them to move forward and more difficult for us because we have to concern ourselves with so many different things.
Yep, but hard work is good work, right? So you talked a little bit about Jude v. Russo, and we did, as we say, we won two different things in that case. I'm a Texan, so the Texas case that was identical to the June v. Russo case that we won 4 years ago meant that pregnant people in Texas could continue to access abortion services. And the same is true in June v. Russo. People who need access to services in Louisiana are still maintaining them. The other thing we won, and I say this, it's important for NARAL members to understand, is the freedom to fight another day. Because as Imani said, this was an incredibly narrow ruling by a Chief Justice who is hostile to abortion rights. We've got a dozen cases in the pipeline, and this is no time to get complacent or feel secure. It's a time to fight even more. And we saw an indication of that in a case that came down just a week later in Trump versus Pennsylvania, which sought to dismantle the contraceptive mandate in the Affordable Care Act, now placing your employer or your university in charge of whether or not you can access birth control. And you touched on this a little bit because it is true that they wrap their sort of campaign for control in this veil of morality. But talk to us a little bit about what Trump versus Pennsylvania means and how we can effectively fight back when they just scream religion anytime that they want to move a controlling agenda forward.
Yeah, Trump versus Pennsylvania, initially, it's important to point out that the religious and moral exemptions that he wants to put in place are not in place, right? So that case was simply about whether or not the process by which he went about trying to extend the Obama era accommodation, which was, if you don't want to provide birth control, that's fine. You just call your insurer, let your insurer know. They'll step in and provide that birth control, and you can keep your fingers out of the whole birth control pie. Trump, barged in and said, okay, well, this is a narrow accommodation. We want a larger accommodation. So I'm going to expand the kinds of organizations that can claim this religious exemption to include secular for-profit companies. And I'm going to extend the religious exemption so that it's also a moral exemption, which means now that if an employer has a religious or a moral exemption, and, what does moral exemption even mean? I mean, essentially it just means I don't like birth control, and I don't really have to explain why. Before, you had to have a sincerely held religious belief that birth control, some of the FDA approved birth control methods are, for example, an abortifacient, even though we know that they're not. The court has to accept these sincerely held religious beliefs as true, which is something that annoys me to no end, because if something isn't true, if you believe that it's true, it doesn't make it any truer, right? So it seems to me that there should be a baseline of facts that we should be working with within the legal rubric. But alas, that's not the world we live in. So people are allowed to sort of concoct religious beliefs courts aren't allowed to question those religious beliefs because they're not in the business of questioning people's religion or what they hold true. And now we have this moral exemption, which, now the exemptions swallow the rule. So anybody who just doesn't like birth control, doesn't want to provide health insurance plans to their employees that cover birth control, they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to say, I don't like it. They don't really have to provide any reason besides it's just my morality. And what ends up happening is that people who are entitled to this legal benefit under the Affordable Care Act now have to figure out other ways to go about obtaining this birth control coverage to which they are entitled. And I think it's really important to recognize that employee benefits packages are paid for through employee labor. So people who work at NARAL, right, you give them an employee benefits package and they are entitled to that benefits package because of the work that they do for you. It's part of their labor. And so by picking and choosing different parts of employee benefit packages that you don't like based on some nebulous claim of morality or religion is essentially taking money out of the pockets of the people who work for these employers on the basis of that employer's so-called religious beliefs. And what's unfortunate, truly unfortunate about this is that the court set the stage for this nonsense back in 2014 with the Hobby Lobby decision, right? And that was a huge case, one of the first cases about the birth control benefit. And in that case, the Supreme Court said to this closely held corporation, this for-profit corporation, you know what? You should be entitled to the same accommodation that the Obama administration is offering to religious schools and religious nonprofits. You should be able to tell your insurer, I don't like birth control. It's against my sincerely held religious beliefs, and I shouldn't have to provide it. And the court said, you know what? We agree. You're a closely held for-profit corporation. You should be permitted to avail yourself of this accommodation, this accommodation, which involves literally just telling your insurer, filling out a form saying, we don't like birth control. Well, the Hobby Lobby decision said that certain for-profit corporations could do that. In that decision, however, was this idea that the accommodation was sufficient, right? That this accommodation that allows people to sort of step back from birth control coverage was sufficient, and that closely held for-profit corporations should be able to also take advantage of that accommodation. Literally, the opinion sort of presumes or assumes that the accommodation was going to be sufficient, even though it said, we're not necessarily saying it is. That's another fight for another day. But listen, the birth control benefit's a good thing. We want women, other people who need birth control to have that access, because all of these studies show that when women have access to birth control, they take that birth control. It means that abortions drop, unplanned pregnancies drop. Insurers love it because they would much rather provide birth control than to have to cover they don't cover abortion because of the Hyde Amendment. That's another discussion for another day. But they would rather provide birth control than to have to see a pregnant person through all 9 to 10 months of a pregnancy. Just as from a profit standpoint, it makes more sense for insurers to try to stop people from having babies if they don't want to have babies. So, the court sort of agreed that this was a good thing, that, dismantling these built-in inequities in the healthcare system was a good thing. And this birth control benefit was a way to do that. And the accommodation to the birth control benefit was a way to address religious people who had a problem with it. But now, 6 years later, the court makeup has changed. Anthony Kennedy is no longer on the court. We've got Gorsuch. We've got Brett Kavanaugh. We've got a very staunchly conservative court now with John Roberts as our swing vote, which that's not a position that we want to be in as people who believe in reproductive freedom and reproductive justice. So, here we are, this promise of birth control that was made to us in 2014 is no longer applicable. The court has said, Trump administration, it's fine. You are more than welcome to expand this exemption so that it swallows the rule. As a matter of rulemaking, as a matter of agency law. And one of the great things about the Trump administration, if you could say there are any great things about the Trump administration, is that they are utterly incompetent when it comes to administrative law. So they will, Trump will decide, after tweeting and reading, watching Fox and Friends and tweeting all caps for an hour, he'll decide, I want to do a thing. And he'll just write an executive order and do the thing. But according to rulemaking, you have to allow the public to have input on that thing that you're doing because it's going to affect the public. It's called a notice and comment period. You have to provide that. And so what this ruling says, this Little Sisters of the Poor ruling says, is that despite all of the shenanigans that the Trump administration pulled when it tried to expand this exemption, including issuing an executive order, issuing rules about the executive order, then taking those rules back, but then issuing other rules and claiming that those rules were final rules without ever allowing the public to comment on them and to make their position known, the court said, that's fine. It's not a big deal. The court didn't say that the particular religious freedom, quote unquote, religious liberty orders that allow these exemptions, the court didn't say they were fine. And so the good thing about that decision is that with a change in administration, all of this can be undone, right? Because Trump has spent so much time crafting policy that is based on executive orders, based on stacking these agencies with Trump loyalists, and then having these agencies just do whatever they want, just run amok, ignoring the Administrative Procedures Act, ignoring institutional rules of law, institutional norms. So the good thing about this administration is they've done a lot of bad things via rulemaking and via executive order, things that can be undone literally immediately. So that's an important takeaway. But generally, this administration, it is what, like you said in the beginning, right? He's a sexual predator. He's a bad guy. He's not a person that is religious. He's not a person that cares about religious people, that cares about anything aside, anything besides himself and maybe his family, maybe. But what he doesn't care about is the rule of law. And so that opens up a space for people who do care about the rule of law to make arguments. And that's kind of what happened in Little Sisters of the Poor. We lost that agency rulemaking, but there is another step. There's the step that says, all right, now we have to actually look at the rule and decide if the rules are okay. They're not. We may never get to that point, hopefully. But yeah, he's a mess. You know what I mean? He's a mess in ways that are far beyond what I ever imagined would be the case when he was elected.
So much in that answer, so much wisdom. And it's a perfect pivot to my next question. Felt really, really important to me when we started writing The Lie That Binds to start at the beginning of the story. And that was when the so-called religious right actually invoked, the first time they invoked religious liberty to move into the political realm, which was in the late 60s, early 70s, when they actually said it violated their religious liberty to be required to follow the dictates of school integration. They didn't want to send their kids to school with African-American kids in this country. And it was really about segregation long before it was about abortion. A lot of people that I come in contact with when I speak out have no idea that the moral majority was grounded in fighting school desegregation, grounded in racism, and that sort of predates Trump, right? Trump is a manifestation, the ultimate manifestation of a long-term effort by this movement to use reproductive oppression as a mechanism to move what is essentially a racist and misogynist agenda and is anything but moral and anything but pro-life. And one of the most and you talked about the agencies and stacking the agencies with ideologues, one of the very, very most painful passages for me to research and then write in the book was about the court case of Jane Doe in 2017, again in my home state of Texas, where the Office of Refugee Resettlement, Immigration and Refugee Resettlement, a man by the name of Scott Lloyd, who was responsible for minors being held at the border, at the time had held a young undocumented woman against her will essentially imprisoning her against Texas state law, which is one of the most restrictive in the country when it comes to abortion rights, to prevent her from terminating a pregnancy, because that was what he believed he was in the administration to do. And a lot of people heard about it, and it went through the courts, and Amani can tell you sort of what happened there. But what I have found is a lot of people didn't hear the other side of that, which is, well, Scott Lloyd was imprisoning young immigrants to prevent them rights to access abortion, tracking their periods to know when they were pregnant, flying across the country to berate them out of terminating their pregnancies. What he wasn't doing was tracking the separation of families, which was what he was supposed to do. And in fact, his single minded focus through the agency of preventing abortion in these young undocumented immigrants has probably resulted in the inability to ever reunify some of these families, and certainly delayed it in other cases, and ignored the public health cost of keeping children separated from their parents. This is a crucial parable to me. Amani and I have talked about the very, very positive impact of the rise of the reproductive justice movement on legacy organizations like NARAL, and having an intersectional understanding of how racism and anti-immigrant sentiment plays into reproductive oppression. So Amani, I want you, our members, to hear from you what you believe our mandate is as NARAL members to understand what's going on there and to carry that forward into our activism.
Sure. So I guess what I would say, and this might sound a little bit bizarre coming from a lawyer, is that the dominant mainstream reproductive rights movement as it has existed, I would say up until maybe a decade ago, was very white-led. It was very focused on abortion rights for middle-class white women, leaving out low-income white women, leaving out people of color, indigenous people, Latinx people. And I think that separation, that sort of inability to process the fight through an intersectional lens really held the movement generally back. And I think that's because mainstream organization, and I mean, NARAL was built on the effort to obtain legal access to abortion. But the problem is that the law isn't enough, because what we have now when it comes to abortion rights, we don't have a positive right to an abortion. We have a negative right to be free from interference from states or governments under certain circumstances. And so that, I think, is sort of the crux of the problem with the fight right now, is that we are so focused on the legalities, at least we have been for a long time, so focused on the legalities and not focused enough on access, not focused enough on the inequalities. So when you notch up these wins, these court wins, that's great for some people. It means that clinics can stay open, which is great for providers because they can continue to provide services that they need to provide, that they want to provide. And it's great for people who can get to those clinics. But what about people who can't? What about people who, low income white people, as I said, Black people, Latinx people, undocumented people? These are people who are at the margins of the reproductive rights movement, because a right to them doesn't mean anything if they don't have access. And so I think now, as the movement is becoming more focused on access, and as the reproductive justice framework, which is a framework that focuses not just on the right to an abortion, but also on the right to have children, and then on the right to raise those children in a safe and healthy environment. And because reproductive justice is such a big umbrella that encompasses so many other issues, of which abortion is only one, reproductive justice sort of allows for, it goes beyond the law. It goes on sort of what statutes say and what the Constitution says and what Roe says and what Planned Parenthood versus Casey says. And it begins to talk about abortion as a human right, because that's what it is. It's a human right. And once we start talking about human rights, we can move beyond the law and begin talking about universal rights. And when we start doing that, an interesting thing starts to happen, is that you sort of begin to move back towards the law. And I think we saw that really clearly in the Kansas Supreme Court decision that found a state right to abortion in Kansas under the state constitution. And if you read that opinion, which I don't know why you would have, because unless you're a lawyer, it's like a 200-page opinion. But it's actually really, it's just, I feel like that is the framework that we need to be going for as lawyers. Well, we're not. That lawyers need to be going for, that movement people, advocates need to be relying on in terms of advocacy, and that journalists need to focus on in terms of couching this fight in a larger context. Because what we had in this Kansas decision is the state Supreme Court judges citing John Locke, citing natural law, talking about abortion in a human rights framework. And when you do that, it becomes a lot more difficult to just sort of sit back and say, well, you have a right to an abortion up until the second trimester, or until it poses a substantial burden. And then we start talking about, well, what's a substantial burden? Is driving 500 miles a substantial burden? Well, maybe it is in Texas because, the ground is really flat. Maybe it's not in another state for another reason. I mean, you start getting into these really technical rules that get lost in the main point, which is that abortion is a human right. And so when and to bring it back to Jane Doe, to that Garza case, if we knew that abortion was a human right, and if we knew that we are looking at this from a reproductive justice standpoint, meaning that confining children separated from their parents means that those parents aren't able to raise their children in a safe and healthy environment. That's a reproductive justice issue. So that brings immigration into the fight for reproductive rights. It brings in trans rights into the fight for reproductive rights. The reason why I changed my language from saying pregnant women to pregnant people is in order to bring in trans people, to bring in gender nonconforming and non-binary people. All of these struggles become one struggle for one human right. And yes, the courts matter. Obviously, the courts matter. I'm not going to be a lawyer sitting here telling you the courts don't matter. But we really do need to be able to think beyond the courts, because the courts aren't the end all be all. There are human rights at stake here. And the more that we can work from that framework, the more people, the reproductive rights movement will be able to speak to. Once the reproductive rights movement sort of, becomes part of the reproductive justice umbrella, then that's just a whole new world, right? It's this swath of people who have been traditionally left out of conversations about abortion rights. It brings them in. So then you can start talking about what specific communities need. What does the undocumented immigrant community need? What do Black communities need? What do Indigenous communities need? What do women in the military need in terms of publicly funded abortion? Women in the military can't get their abortion funded because they get their health care through the government, and the government doesn't allow it. People who rely on Indian health services, Indigenous people, can't get abortions paid for because the government doesn't allow it. That's just discrimination in healthcare services, in the delivery of healthcare services. That's, all of these things are so critical. And so I think that the more that movement people, advocates embrace reproductive justice, the farther we're going to be able to go.
That is amazing. And that is, we always talk about our commitment in our organizing to understanding the history, as we are trying to do through the Lie That Binds, to aspiring to be anti-racist. It is a lifelong journey. It is because it's ethically imperative. It's because there is no way to achieve our mission without it. And it's because it is strategic to work from that intersectional perspective in concert with our allies in the reproductive justice movement. I hope that you have loved hearing from Imani Gandhi as much as I have tonight. If you have, follow her at Angry Black Lady on Twitter. Check out Boomed Lawyers, but also buy the book. And after you buy the book at theliethatbinds.com, in early August, we are going to release a podcast, and Imani herself actually is a featured guest speaker on the podcast. So there's so much more to this conversation than we have time for now. We are here to educate, but also to activate. We seek to innovate and find the best ways to make political impact. And you, as our members, are crucial to that. In this moment, we are bringing together NARAL's rockstar reproductive freedom volunteers, champion candidates, and movement leaders virtually from every part of the country for our once in a lifetime activist summit on August 8th and 9th. It's called Our Freedom, Our Fight, NARAL's Activist Summit. We're going to educate ourselves more, but we're also going to do some skill building and sharing of tools, analysis, and build our communities, both for the fight in November, which we know is an existential fight, but also that fight in November is just the beginning, not the end. It is the opportunity to transform the way we do our work. We need you there. Our members are our superpower. I say that all the time. So we want to prepare together. Join us August 8th and 9th for our Activist Summit, Our Freedom, Our Fight. Hear more from Imani, buy the book, listen to the podcast. It's been a pleasure to be here with you guys tonight. I'm going to hand you back to one of my favorite people, someone who inspires me every single day, who predates me at NARAL, who helped me actually learn my way as the head of this organization. Travis Valley, take it away.
Oh my God. Everyone, find you a boss that'll compliment you like that. Thank you, Elise. I appreciate that. Wow. Can you imagine? Like, I want to see the next Marvel movie. I want to see Elise and Imani out fighting for all of our humanity. Thank you, truly, two visionary leaders. Thank you so much. But we are not done. Do not leave yet. I am going to tell you the next journey you're going to take. And trust me, you're going to want to continue on this journey with us tonight. We are now moving to 2 sessions. This is the Choose Your Own Adventure part of the night. So we are posting in the chat right now what links you can click to go to your next event. Side note, I'm moderating one of those next events. So if you're wondering, where's the host for this session? Just give me a minute. I got to switch screens. Technology. So 1, you can choose a session where if you are inspired to order the book, The Lie That Binds, maybe you already have, I know, you have friends, family, colleagues, your exes, whoever, who you want to get together and do a book club. You may already be a part of a book club. Reading is my passion. If I weren't presenting in a session, I would be going to Kelly's session, my colleague Kelly, who will be leading the session about how to organize a book club around The Lie That Binds. So I hope you enjoy that. If you want a sneak peek to the Activist Summit, you're going to want to talk with me. Can I tell you, see this gray hair? About half of that is from the Activist Summit. So I want to tell you what I've been working so hard on, what I'm so excited, the vision that Elise and NARAL have for this such a critical summit for our best activists fighting for reproductive freedom. You're going to want to click on the link to go to my session. I'm going to stop my screen now. My colleagues in the chat box are sharing the links to the next sessions. I'm going to leave. Y'all, I'm busy. I got a session to go. So click on one of those links to go to the next session. I'll see you there. Or maybe I won't. Maybe you'll go see Kelly. Go to a session. See y'all soon.